Let me ask you to put your product development hat on. And if you pair Twitter all the way back, what is it? And what do you think it can be in 10 years' time?
Well, what I've said is that I think Twitter is currently the best, or looked at another way, the least bad public square. A forum for the exchange of ideas nationally and internationally, but I think it could be a lot better at that. In order to be better at that, it needs to really get rid of the bots and the scams and spammers and basically and anyone trying to create sort of fake influence on the site by where it's one person or one entity operating 100,000 accounts, or obviously scammers are not good, and Twitter really needs to do a much better job at that. It also needs to build more trust with users. I think the way to do that is by open sourcing the algorithm so everyone can see how the algorithm works and can suggest improvements and changes. I would literally just put the Twitter algorithm on GitHub and say, like, hey, anyone want to suggest changes to this, please go ahead. And just, you really want transparency to build trust. And then any sort of adjustments to tweets or any human intervention with any account on Twitter should be highlighted as a Twitter person took the following action with your account or with this tweet, so that you're not sort of sitting there in the dark wondering, why did this tweet not get any attention, or why did this one get a lot of attention? It's far too random. And then I think Twitter needs to be much more even-handed. It currently has a strong left bias because it's based in San Francisco. I don't think the people there necessarily intend, or at least perhaps some of them don't intend to have a left bias. They just, from their perspective, it seems moderate, but they're just coming at it from an environment that is very far left. So. But then this fails to build trust in the rest of the United States and also perhaps in other parts of the world, because Twitter needs to be even-handed and be, I think I said publicly, victory would be that the most far right 10% and the most far left 10% are equally upset. I don't think this is a situation where you're going to get necessarily a lot of praise. you're just gonna balance the anger.
So how do you? Because people will automatically associate you with Tesla and you with Twitter. Is there any risk in your mind that the actions that you're going to take at Twitter, which you've admitted freely will upset some people, potentially lead to a commercial impact on Tesla?
I'm confident that we will be able to sell all the cars we can make. I mean, currently the lead time for ordering a Tesla is ridiculously long. So our issue is not demand, it is production.
But that's at the moment because of the global supply chains and the chip shortages. That's less around electric car demand, which we are expecting to go absolutely through the roof, and you obviously have very ambitious targets for that at Tesla.
Yeah, I mean, even before there was the supply chain issues, Tesla demand exceeded production. So now its demand is exceeding production to a ridiculous degree. We're actually probably going to limit or just stop taking orders for anything beyond a certain period of time, because some of the timing is like a year away. Anyway, the frustration that we're seeing from customers is being unable to get them a car, not are they willing or interested in buying a car. Basically, I think zero about demand generation and a lot about production and engineering and supply chain.
I have two more questions on Twitter, if I may, before we turn for the rest of the session to Tesla. How confident are you the deal will happen? And is there a risk, this is all one question, and is there a risk, because you're putting a lot of your personal stake up for this to fund it, is there a risk that if it all goes south, you're imperiling your stake in Tesla, potentially hurting Tesla financially and maybe even SpaceX, if it all goes to pot? That's the technical term.
Yeah, sure. I think there's still a lot of things that need to get done before this deal concludes. Obviously, there's not yet even been a shareholder vote. And Twitter has not yet filed the proxy for a shareholder vote. So there are still, some outstanding questions that need to be resolved. So it is certainly not a done deal. Just objectively, it is not a done deal. The best case scenario is that this would be, I think, perhaps done in 2 or 3 months. Yeah.
And the final question, and this is really the two-paid elephant in the room: are you planning to let Donald Trump back on?
Well, I think there's a general question of should Twitter have permanent bans? I've talked with Jack Dorsey about this, and he and I are of the same mind, which is that permanent bans should be extremely rare and really reserved for people where they're trying to, for accounts that are bots or spam scam accounts, where there's just no legitimacy to the account at all. I do think that it was not correct to ban Donald Trump. I think that was a mistake, because it alienated a large part of the country and did not ultimately result in Donald Trump not having a voice. He is now going to be on Truth Social, as will a large part of the right in the United States, and so I think this could end up being, frankly, worse than having a single forum where everyone can debate. I guess the answer is that I would reverse the perma ban. Obviously, I don't own Twitter yet, so this is not like a thing that will definitely happen, because what if I don't own Twitter? But my opinion, and Jack Dorsey, I want to be clear, shares this opinion, is that we should not have perma bans. Now that doesn't mean that somebody gets to say whatever they want to say. If they say something that is illegal or otherwise, just destructive to the world, then that there should be perhaps a timeout, a temporary suspension, or that particular tweet should be made invisible or have very limited traction. But I think perma bans just fundamentally undermine trust in Twitter as a town square where everyone can voice their opinion. It was I think it was a morally bad decision, to be clear, and foolish in the extreme.
Even after he egged on the crowd who went to the US Capitol, some of them carrying nooses, you still think it was a mistake to remove him?
I think if there are tweets that are wrong, they should, and bad, those should be either deleted or made invisible. And a suspension, a temporary suspension is appropriate, but not a permanent ban.
So if the deal completes, he might potentially come back on, but with the understanding that if he does something similar again, he'll be back in the sin bin.
He has publicly stated that he will not be coming back to Twitter, and that he will only be on Truth Social. And this is the point that I'm trying to make, which is perhaps not getting across, is that banning Trump from Twitter didn't end Trump's voice. It will amplify it among the right. And this is why it is morally wrong and flat out stupid.
Okay, thank you. We will, let's turn to Tesla again. I'd like to ask you about your ambitions for the future. You've said you want the company to be able to make 20 million cars a year by 2030, which would make it the same size as Toyota and Volkswagen combined today. Give us a sense. What does the business look like by 2030 to make 20 million cars? Plants, footprints, models.
Yes, well, this is not a forum for announcing new product, new Tesla products. The 20 million by 2030 is an aspiration, not a promise. And the reason for aiming for something like that is there are approximately 2 billion cars and trucks in the world. And for us to really make a dent in sustainable energy and electrification, I think we need to replace at least 1% of the fleet per year to really be meaningful. And that's where the 20 million units comes from. Let's try to replace 1% of the global fleet of 2 billion cars and trucks per year. That's our aspiration. It's not a promise, it's an aspiration. I think we've got a good chance of getting there. And people will see, based on the products that we unveil, will be able to judge for themselves whether that goal is realistic or not. We have an incredible team at Tesla and executing very well. And our annual growth rates are faster than any large manufactured product in the history of Earth. I think the next fastest was the growth of the Model T, and we're faster than the Model T. So, if that growth rate continues, then obviously we will reach 20 million vehicles a year. But we may stumble and not reach that goal. So, but I'd say it's roughly equally difficult to have gotten to this point as it will be to get to 20 million.
And what's the biggest uncertainty with getting to 2030? Is it manufacturing ramping? Is it the raw materials? Is it something else?
There are some raw material constraints that we see coming in lithium production, probably in about 3 years, and in cathode production. The two main cathode choices are nickel and iron phosphate. Obviously, iron is extremely plentiful. The Earth is 32% iron by composition. So, if a little bit of trivia, if someone says, "What is Earth made of?" The single biggest element that Earth is made of is iron. The second biggest element that Earth is made of is oxygen, which is about 30% of Earth mass. So clearly iron's not in short supply. The phosphate is slightly more of a challenge, but still quite common. So I do not see any fundamental scaling constraints. And lithium is also quite common. So lithium is practically everywhere. So this is not a question of a shortage of like, as though it's some rare element. It's really just that the lithium mining and especially the refining capacity and that of taking iron and phosphorus and turning it into battery grade iron phosphate or nickel and turning it into battery grade nickel it's really the equipment. I think the single biggest constraint would be the equipment necessary to convert the ore into battery grade materials. Yes, I think you're sort of putting too much emphasis on those 20 million vehicles by 2030 as though this is some grand promise, some hill upon which we will die. It is simply an aspiration, and we may achieve it or we may not. Our goal is to accelerate the advent of sustainable energy, and so that's why we want to make a lot of cars and also a lot of stationary battery packs, because the three pillars of a sustainable energy future are electric transport, stationary battery packs, and solar and wind, and geothermal and hydro, basically sustainable energy sources. But solar and wind particularly are intermittent. And so you need stationary battery packs to store the energy when the sun doesn't shine.
Do you think Tesla has succeeded in its goal then? Or do you think there's still much more to do?
No, I think that we've not succeeded in the goal. If you consider the goal to be getting the automotive industry to move strongly towards electric vehicles, I think that part of the goal we have succeeded in. That was explicitly part of our goal, is to get the industry moving towards electric vehicles, because they were doing nothing in that direction when we started. And for the longest time, they were dismissing the concept of electric vehicles. And then Tesla started taking market share away from them, and that changed their mind.
How long do you think you're likely to stay at Tesla?
As long as I can be useful.
And what else is there in terms of potential future projects that piques your interest? You're obviously going to be quite involved in Twitter if the deal goes through, but you've got Tesla, you've got SpaceX, you've got Boring, you've got Neuralink. As you're looking around thinking you potentially have capacity, what else is there in terms of the kind of, I don't know, betterment of the human condition or improving Earth that you feel you might want to turn your attention to in the future?
Well, I'm trying to take the set of actions that I think most likely make the future good, and hopefully not pave the road to hell with good intentions. So I think Tesla's about accelerating sustainable energy, because we obviously need a sustainable energy future on Earth for Earth to be good. Then SpaceX is about extending life beyond Earth so that we may become a multi-planetary species, and with Starlink providing internet coverage to the least served in the world.
What do you think the next goals are then for SpaceX? And do you have a date in mind for when you think they will get to Mars?
I think we should be able to, I don't know, maybe get Starship to Mars uncrewed in 3 to 5 years. And then I think if that's successful, then we may be able to send a crewed mission to Mars before the end of the decade. Can
I bring us down to earth gently and ask you about China in relation to Tesla?
Sure.
How important is the market for you? Do you think China contributes most of your growth in the future?
No, I think China is obviously a very significant market, but it is, I'd say it's probably 25 to 30% of our market long term. The rest of the world is probably 3/4 of it.
Do you see, I promised I didn't have any more Twitter questions, but this is sort of a Twitter question. Do you see any risk at all that China uses your ownership of Twitter potentially to interfere or block Tesla's operations in the country? Because obviously China has banned Twitter.
I've seen no indication to that effect.
Okay. How close would you say you are personally to the Chinese government? Because when you set up the factory in Shanghai, the rules were rewritten around joint ventures to allow you to do that.
Well, yeah, I was certainly asked many times by the government of China to do a factory in China. I said, well, we're not going to do one which is 51% locally owned. And so if they're willing to change the rules, not just for us, but for everyone, then we would move forward. And so they did. And I think it's been very successful so far, and the government's very happy about it. And so, I don't know, things are proceeding fairly well.
How many other plants are you expecting to open in China in the near future?
Well, we're not expecting to open any additional plants in China in the near future. We will be expanding our Shanghai factory, but our focus on production is going to be on the two new factories that we've recently completed in Berlin and in Austin, Texas.
How hard is it as a problem to solve? Because you've made predictions in the past about autonomy, and some of those haven't come to fruition at the same time. Has your understanding of the problem of autonomy changed over the last few years?
Yes. I would say that self-driving is one of those things where there are a lot of false dawns, or where you think you're getting there, but then you end up asymptoting. Your progress is initially linear, and then looks logarithmic and sort of tapers off because you're in a local maximum that you did not realize you were in. Now, at this point, I think we are no longer trapped in a local maximum, and obviously I could be wrong, but I think we are actually quite close to achieving self-driving at a safety level that is better than human. And it appears, my best guess is that we will get there this year. But we're really not far from it. And like I said, the best way to assess this is to be in our beta program, or look at the videos of those who are in the beta program, and look at the progress that has occurred. And the progress is dramatic. And I'm confident we will not merely get to the safety level of a human, we will get far in excess of the safety level of a human. So I think ultimately probably a factor of 10 safer than a human as measured by the probability of injury.
Now, given where you're trying to get to with this, the factor above human driving, the potential lives that could be saved with that, I need to ask you about some of the accidents and fatalities that have happened with vehicles previously. The people who died, do you consider that was a price worth paying to get to the level where we want to be to save more human lives in the future?
Well, it is important to note that, and we have never said ever that Tesla, the Tesla autopilot does not require attention. We have always made that extremely clear, repeatedly. You can't even turn it on without acknowledging that it requires supervision. We remind you of that every time you turn it on, to ad nauseum. So this was not a case of setting expectations that the car could simply drive itself in the past, and then not meeting those expectations. That is completely untrue. Now, it is also the case, however, and I knew this would be true from the beginning, that people don't, the people whose lives are saved with autopilot or autonomy don't know that their lives were saved. And so, if you look at, say, deaths, annual automotive deaths every year, it's about around 1 million people per year die from automotive accidents. Maybe 10 million per year are severely injured. And so, with autonomy, the car's, driving, or it's assisted driving right now, but it will be fully autonomous in the future. Like I said, those who didn't realize they would have crashed or hit a pedestrian or a cyclist, they don't know that. So basically, even if you let's say save 90% of the people that would otherwise have died, the remaining 10% who did die will still sue you. Now, but I think you have to say, like, in the grand scheme of things, what is the morally right decision? And I'm a strong believer in doing the reality of good over the perception of good. And I have utter contempt for those who prefer the perception of good over the reality of it. And so we're just going to take the heat. But if we believe that the probability of injury is reduced, and are very confident of that. But we also know that we're going to be sued despite doing the right thing. We will do the right thing and get sued.
What is Tesla's approach to smaller and more affordable end of the market? You're going to go smaller than the Model 3, but could you get into a scooter, micromobility, something else?
Scooters are very dangerous. I would not recommend anyone drive a scooter. If there's ever an argument between a scooter and a car, the scooter will lose.
Would you ever consider licensing your platform to other OEMs? Presumably that would help switch the industry towards electric mobility, in your opinion.
Well, we've already open sourced all our patents. Anyone can use our patents for free. So, great. We only patent things in order to prevent others from creating this minefield of patents that inhibit progress with electric vehicles. But several years ago, I came to the conclusion we're never going to really prosecute anyone for using our patents. So let's just say you can use any Tesla patents for free. So I think hopefully that's helpful to others. But I think the regular car industry, the traditional car makers, will solve electrification. It's not fundamentally difficult at this point to make electric cars. The thing that I think they may be interested in licensing is Tesla Autopilot full self-driving. And I think that would save a lot of lives. But I think we still have to prove ourselves for, I don't know, maybe another year or so. And then perhaps there will be some other car makers who may wish to license Tesla Autopilot. And we'd be very open to that.
Thank you. Of all the other EV startups, which one has impressed you the most?
Well, I think the company making the most progress besides Tesla is actually VW, which is not a startup, but could be viewed in some ways as a startup from an electric vehicle standpoint. So VW is doing the most on the electric vehicle front. I think there will be some very strong companies coming out of China. There's just a lot of super talented, hardworking people in China that are strongly believe in manufacturing, and they won't just be burning the midnight oil; they'll be burning the 3 a.m. oil. So they won't even leave the factory type of thing. Whereas in America, people are trying to avoid going to work at all.
You've been critical of lockdowns in the past, particularly when it happened in the US. Shanghai is currently locked down. Most of the Western world is able to carry on functioning at the moment because of vaccines, but China is going towards a zero COVID approach. What do you make of the Chinese government's actions?
Well, I've had some conversations with the Chinese government in recent days, and it's clear that the lockdowns are being lifted rapidly. So I would not expect this to be a significant issue in the coming weeks. In the past, where I was sort of upset with lockdowns is where those lockdowns differentially affected Tesla, but not others. So in the case of California and the Bay Area counties specifically, every other car factory in North America